Step into the gritty streets of Thamberg, where Jord Whittaker's dreams crumble under the weight of a ruthless city. From a fleeting ember of hope to a desperate pact with the city guard, his journey is a haunting spiral of survival and sacrifice. Will he reclaim his future, or become another cog in the machine? Just a quick reminder before we get started. Only 4% of my viewers have subscribed to the channel so far. If you enjoy the content, I'd really appreciate it if you could take a moment to hit that subscribe button and support the channel. Thank you so much. Now start amazing story.
Oh, take a step. Then to take another. That was Jord's mantra. It was already late, 10 to midnight, sky dark and bleak with stars unseen. The day had already fled by the time Jord understood that his job prospect as a store clerk was just another honeypot of toxicity and exploitation. Worse than the last mansion that he fled. That morning he welded a small ember of hope. But now it laid smoldered in a crater of rage and hopelessness. His eyes wandered the familiar street. He had walked countless times, first for school, then for work. He had left school with bright eyes and brighter dreams. But now, if someone pried deep enough, they'd find them buried alongside his hopes. How foolish now he felt, thinking that he could plot a path towards a better future. His skin crawled at the thought of groveling before his old boss, begging to be taken back. Yet the thought of asking for help was no better. The walls seemed to close in as he weighed his options. Each one felt heavier than the last, until the asphalt itself seemed to lunge at him to drown him and all his sorrows with it. A bout of vertigo hit him. He stopped near a lamppost and took a deep breath. The world, now back on its axis, stood still at last. The breath, however, carried the acrid scent of piss. He didn't know what to do, whether to weep, to laugh, or perhaps to lose himself, and do both at the same time. He felt drenched in exhaustion and emptiness. But still, a step had to be taken to be guaranteed reprieve from the harsh environment. Perhaps, if only in thought, a small crime could be committed to pass the day in the local jail. Something minor, insignificant in the grand scheme of things. Vandalism, maybe. He glanced around but found no mark and no guard to share his exploits with. After all, easy targets like wooden benches had long been replaced by iron thrones, bolted into the cobblestones. The city hall, solemnly proclaimed through the Gazette, insisted it was for the good of the environment. Wood rots, they said. But Jord, like most, knew better. Yet he tried anyway. The chairs didn't even budge. Frustration gnawed at him as he turned to the lamppost, but it too resisted his efforts. Finally, he pulled out his phone, flinging it at the glass of the lamp. It missed. Of course, it missed. Desperation surged as he tried to climb the lamppost instead, but his weary body betrayed him, sliding down after every futile attempt. Dejected, he retrieved his phone, checked for damages. There were none, and slipped it back into his pocket. With a heavy sigh, he began his long march home. Past the shuttered pharmacy, its neon cross dead. Past the playground, swings creaking in the wind like hanged men. His boots scuffed through pamphlets for a union rally. 2 winters gone, ink bleached to ghosts. Somewhere, glass shattered. Laughter, sharp and mean, echoed off the carcass of the abandoned paper mill. A figure lurched from a doorway, drunk and desperate, reeking of alcohol and defeat. Jord sidestepped, heart hammering, but the man just spat and crumpled against the wall. Now he clutched his head. What did go wrong? He muttered to himself. Jord walked faster. The cold gnawed through his jacket. Halfway home, he passed the old bus depot, its timetable still advertising routes discontinued years ago. A feral cat yowled from the rafters of a building left to rot. By the time he reached his block, a row of brownstones hunched like broken teeth, the chill had seeped into his marrow. The key rasped in the lock, too loud in the stillness. Inside, the air hung thick with the sour musk of unwashed dishes and resentment. He crept forward, soles grazing the floorboards to mute their groan. Past his parents' door, its frame leaking, a slit of blue TV light. Past his brother's room, where muffled snores rumbled like distant turning cogs. His own door yielded with a whine. Once again, he'd forgotten to oil it. A plate of congealed stew waited on the table, its grease haloed under the desk lamp's glare. The sheets, though tucked with military precision, smelled faintly of mothballs and mildew. He shoveled the cold food into his mouth, barely tasting it, then collapsed onto the mattress. Sleep came swift and depthless. It was well past first, light, and nobody stirred to wake him. His own fault, he thought. Should have set an alarm. He rose and shuffled into the kitchen, greeted only by blissful silence and the rumbling of outside traffic. He tore off a hunk of stale bread, drizzled it with honey, and washed it down with a mug of milk. My thanks, Uncle Tom, he thought, crumbs scattering as he chewed. Munching, he pictured his family weekly pilgrimage, his father's work boots polished to a dull shine, his mother's hands rubbing her grandmother's ring, Elias standing tall beside them. They went for the communion of shared breath. Not scripture. His mother had told him so years ago, her voice rough from age and smoke. The church was a sanctuary, she'd said, and for an hour each Sunday they could pretend they weren't cogs in Tomberg's rusted machinery. Just bodies, warm and flawed, singing off key, fumbling prayers, passing the collection plate like a beggar's bowl. For a moment, the weight of their lives didn't vanish. It simple shifted. Jord hadn't crossed the threshold in years, but Elia still endured. Of course he did. Elia had mastered the art of folding himself into whatever shape the moment demanded. The hymns dragged now, and the sermons trite, for they recited the same hollow homilies about patience and piety. Yet Jord's soul ached sometimes. Phantom pains where the pew's wood once pressed into him, where his brother's elbow would nudge him to stand, to kneel, to perform. His gaze drifted to the fridge, its door plastered with unpaid bills, a church, calendar circling Sundays in red, and reality slammed into him like punch in the gut. The first order of the morning was to set an agenda, again, to plot a path. What's to be done? The question hungered at him like a starved wolf. Those old bastards had taken him for a fool, led him by the nose to abandon the old man employ. Now, to crawl back, grovel before his old capo, begging to be reinstated, or try his luck with the Black Hand. But now he knew no one, and no one in the know knew him. And him to turn backwards and reopen a closed chapter, to disown. His promise to Elia? Unthinkable. He snorted, rose stiffly, walked outside, closing the door behind him. The road greeted him with its usual pallor. Cracked tarmac, boarded shop fronts, the sour tang of neglect, a neglect that afflicted near 1 million souls. The cobbles beneath Jord's boots were uneven, their weathered grooves mapping generations of heavy tread. He walked without direction, letting the rhythm of his breath, sharp inhales tinged with the acrid bite of the last distant foundries, sync with his steps. The canal's murky water lapped at moss-slick stones, its surface oiled with a rainbow, sheens that shuddered in the wind. A fractured pane in a boarded-up warehouse caught the weak morning light, scattering prism shards across his path. He paused, tracking the dance of fractured color over old cobblestone. For a moment, the city's growl, the clatter of goods trains, the sawtooth shouts of hawkers, fuzzed into white noise. His fingers brushed the cold iron of a rusted bollard, its pitted surface grounding him. In, out. He walked on, the knot in his chest despooling thread by thread. Then he saw it. A guard's manifesto, easily recognized by the blue lilac framing, plastered crookedly on a lamppost, its edges fluttering in the breeze. Better than nothing, he thought, and exhaled, peeling it free. The ink smudged under his thumb, but the words burned clear. Restore order. Reclaim your future. Citizens of Tamberg. Times are hard. The streets grow lawless. Your family's unsafe. The so-called unions and militias peddle chaos, not bread. But there is another path. Join the city guard, steady wages, 3 meals a day, a bed off the streets. We offer purpose. Protect your neighbors from looters, arsonists, and foreign agitators. Pride, wear the uniform of civic duty. Pension, secure. Your old age while securing the city. I was starving, my children crying. The guard gave me a rifle. And a future. Sergeant V. Harkin, former dock worker. The choice is clear. Chaos. Anarchy in the alleys. Your children scavenging scraps. Order. A clean uniform, a full belly, and the gratitude of Tamberg. Report to the Citadel at your leisure. Bring your hands, your loyalty, and leave your grievances at the gate. Tamberg stands strong when its people stand together. He stood frozen, the now smeared paper cold in his palm. To take it would solve everything. Now. But at what cost? What would Elia do? He frantically paced around. His teeth found the thumbnail again, gnawing at the frayed ridge. A terrible path of violence once again, unrevealed before him. A path he knew like a mother tongue. His childhood hadn't been gentle, and the chaos that scorched the nation of Meridia had robbed most of its residents of their lifehood. Even now, he could taste the pang of hunger, the metallic tang of a muffed baton's kiss, the absurd thrill of sprinting from guards with friends who'd later vanish in acrylic smoke. Yet, only Yord's parents lingered in his mind as they always had, voices sharpened to scalpels, eyes dissecting his every stumble. They tried, he'd remind himself. Their love was a ledger. Rows of labor traded for meals, calloused hands gripping his brother's report cards like salvation deeds. They'd bent their spine to the endless hard work, gifting their sons threadbare uniforms and a roof that dripped ambition. But he couldn't forget their lashings. "Ungrateful," his father would mutter, knuckles whitening around his belt. "Your brother never—" a refrain that often stung worse than the old man's cincture. It was the only choice that made sense to Yord, a pragmatic surrender to the arithmetic of survival. By joining the city guard, Yord would trade his fraying morals for a uniform and a wage packet thick enough to staunch his family's bleeding. Coffers. No more skulking in the dock's shadows, no more rationing the food. The guard's coin, however tainted, would buy the medicine, silence the landlord's threats. Let Elia's gaze linger on the badge, let his father's jaw tighten. At the compromise, better a son in service to Tamburg's rot than another corpse in its gutters. And so, with resolve as hollow as the mayor's promises, Yord trudged towards the city's bureaucratic heart. The journey spanned an hour, each instant measured by the sound of the sloshing water. The citadel fortification loomed ahead, a relic of the Varicrishan Empire, its fractured walls now housing the city's bureaucratic heart. 2 bridges punctuated the route, their arches sagging under the weight of silent histories. The first bridge bore scars of neglect, potholes patched with asphalt gone brittle, rusted railings. Beyond it, the streets tightened, buildings older, with their height inflated by cyclic nature of construction. The second bridge, though no grander, wore its age with a veneer of care. Swept pavements, lampposts, and walls free of graffiti, the polished surveillance cameras pivoting like watchful predators. Here, the citadel's shadow stretched long. Its remaining grand walls, pocked with time, framed a compound of steel-clad annexes and flickering LED signage. The air thickened with the static of bureaucracy. Permits, quotas, fines. No opulence marked this seat of power, only the sterile efficiency of a system that had long since traded paper for spreadsheets. The bureaucracy heart was no stranger to Yord. More than once, he'd scraped too close to the law's teeth. Petty thefts, bar scuffles, nights in cells that stank of ammonia. Thankfully, the clerk's digital ledgers had missed his worst crimes. But the ghost lingered. A cautionary notice here, a sergeant's narrowed glare there. Now, with a prayer to whatever gods monitored the halls, he trudged forward, gambling that they misplaced his records. He walked until the lobby yawned before Yord, its vaulted ceiling strung with fluorescent lights that buzzed. The air hung thick with the smell of cheap disinfectant. At its end sat one of the clerk's desk, made of frosted glass and stainless steel, its surface empty save for a computer and a stack of papers. Behind it hunched a clerk, her face lit by the pale glow of a monitor. A machine-written sign. Taped to the desk read, "Inquiries." To her back stretched halls. Yord took a glance and quickly read, Hall A. Civil Affair. Hall B. Public Infrastructure. Hall C. Public Records H.A. Before he could read the next hall, the clerk surprised him, making him almost jump in surprise. "State Purpose," she said. Her expression hovered between weariness and detached efficiency. A laminated name tag read M. Voss in fading letters. When she spoke, her voice carried the monotone cadence of someone who'd repeated, "Next in line, please 10,000 times. Good morrow." And yes, yes, I would like to inquire about the city guard. Clerk M. Voss didn't glance up, her fingers clattering keys. City guard inquiries? Hall G, subsection A. Application fees 20 marks, payable at the Hall of Publics. Records. Sign here. A form slid across the desk, its corners frayed. She stabbed a pen toward the dotted line, gaze fixed on her flickering screen. Jord, prickling under the impatient glare of the man behind him, Jord heard him cough, snatched the pen and scrawled his signature beside the date. 25, woe 4, 147. That's it? Jord asked, thumb grazing the calluses webbing his palm. Yes, take the form with you. Next in line, please. Jord hesitated, the prickling weight of indecision tightening his collar. Was the form meant for public records or the guard? With a shrug, he tucked the single page into his jacket, its edges already damp with sweat, and trudged toward the city guard's hall. After a pair of stairs and some wrong turns, he found the entrance of the hall. Nothing major, just a sign above the door that stated what he already knew. Firmly, he opened the door. Inside, he found a small group of people. By quick glance, he numbered them to be about 4, 5 with the clerk, who had bags under his eyes. Sitting in front of a desk, he started to see a pattern here. All clerks seemed more dead than alive. Jord slumped into a seat, took out his phone, and launched into a mindless game, droning out the voices. He waited, thumb jabbing at the screen, until a glance upward revealed only one woman ahead. He slid the phone into his pocket, straightened, and feigned patience. The door creaked as the final applicant departed. Jord ears ringed with the clerks. Robotic. Next, please. Jord rose. Ah, yes. Good morrow. I wish to inquire about the city guard position, Jord said as he settled into the chair directly facing the clerk. Good morrow. Name and place of residence? The clerk asked. Jord took in the clerk's tag, and it stated, A. Hargrave. Jord Whittaker. The Boltworks, number 22. Hargrave. Typed and then paused, eyes flicking across the screen. A pixelated mugshot blinked into view on his wire-framed glasses. Jord at 20, one eye swollen shut, his split lip crusted with blood. The charge sheet beneath it read, Disorderly Conduct, Section 12B, Public Assembly without permit. The clerk leaned back. The 37 dock strike? He said, not looking up. You were detained under Commissioner Veld's tenure. A messy business. Jord shifted, the wooden chair digging into his spine. What's that got to do with 23%? Hargrave cut him off. The glow of the screen gave his face an almost sickly pallor. Quarterly revenue. Drop. Pension fund shorted 800 grand marks. His voice flattened, the way accountants recite funeral costs. They still let you sleep at night? Those principles of yours? Principles? You... Jord leaned forward, knuckles whitening on the desk's edge. You lot send the dogs to crack skulls over a fucking spreadsheet. Language, Mr. Whittaker. Hargrave tutted, pulling a form from his drawer. He slid it across the desk without breaking eye contact. Let's not dwell on the past. After all, the city is forgiving, provided one understands one's position on the totem pole. Jord stared at the header. Form 8C. Employment waiver. The text swam. Renounce past affiliations. Relinquish claims of complaint. Comply with. The public stature. Sign, Hargrave said, and we'll pretend that your little mishaps over the years never happened. If you sign, your record will be expunged. A clean state, if you will. A fly buzzed against the window behind him, trapped. Or keep brooding about the past. See how that feeds you. And Jord, for all the reluctance that he held, signed. Hargrave's lips curled into a faint, practiced smile. Welcome aboard, Mr. Whittaker. May your tenure be long, and your efforts serve the betterment of all. With a swift motion, he retrieved the signed form, tucking it neatly into a file. Hargrave glanced at the clock on the wall before turning. His attention back to Jord. You'll report to the Citadel Guards Department on Monday at Yo 7 Bo Sharp. That's Building 3, East Wing. Present yourself to Officer Laurie at the reception desk. Jord frowned. So 7 no. What happens if I'm late? Hargrave adjusted his glasses, a faint smirk tugging at the corner of his mouth. You won't be late, Mr. Whittaker. Tardiness suggests a lack of discipline, and the ministry has no room for the undisciplined. Right, Jord muttered, his voice tight. You'll receive your training schedule upon arrival, along with your uniform and a copy of the Guard Code of Conduct. I'd recommend familiarizing yourself with it thoroughly. Hargrave's tone shifted, more clipped. Failure to adhere to protocol won't just reflect poorly on you. It will be considered a breach of contract and thus require the payment of perceived damages in full. Jord clenched his jaw but nodded. Got it. Hargrave leaned back in his chair. Good. And one more thing. Leave whatever romantic notions you may have about justice at the door. The guard doesn't deal in ideals. We deal in order. He slid a business card across the desk. In case you have further questions, though I suggest you don't. I'm sorry, but Yord was not sorry. I still have a paper that I signed at the receptionist. What should I do with it? Submit it at the Hall of Public Records, along with a fee of 10 marks, Hargrave said. Farewell, Whitaker. Yord stood, the weight of the moment hanging heavy. Without another word, he turned and exited the room, leaving the seat vacant for the next claimant. Leaving the clerk's room, submitting the paperwork to the Public Records Hall, and finally exiting the Citadel left Yord in a daze. The clerk had cornered him, plastering in his face the reason he'd failed to climb the social ladder. Jord couldn't decide whether to seethe at the man's gall or begrudgingly admire his twisted pragmatism. For now, he started trudging home, shoulders slumped beneath the weight of it all. The tolling bells had just marked midday when Yord reached home. The heat pressed down like a damp rag. The house was quiet. Too quiet, save for Elias hunched at the kitchen table, scribbling in a notebook. Yord kicked off his boots, squinted at the page Elias was bent over, linear algebra, Yord guessed, and jerked his chin at their parents' empty seats. Where are the heroes of the hour? Elias didn't glance up. Soup kitchen, again. His pencil scratched louder. The father needed volunteers to chop onions. Volunteers? Yord snorted, slumping into a chair that screeched against the floor. Or victims? Dad said it's community duty. Elias's voice dripped with air quotes. Right. Duty. Yord flicked a dried pea left on the table. It pinged against the wall, falling in the bin. Bet they'll still moan about us not pitching in. Already did. Elias finally looked up, deadpan. Left us a list. Dishes, laundry, moral improvement. Yord groaned. Yord then grinned as Elias continued to scribble. Oi, you eaten yet? He gestured towards the window where the smell of freshly baked pies wafted from. Or do you fancy a proper meal for once? Mrs. Pelly's got mutton stew on. Elias glanced up, mock scowling. I had 2 whole biscuits and some peas. Practically a feast. 2 whole biscuits. Yord snatched the notebook, dodging Elias's swipe. That's just crumbs with ambition. Come on, my treat. Your treat? Elias raised a brow. Last time you treated me, we split a sausage roll and you owe me 2 marks still. Yord clutched his chest. Betrayed. And after I carried you home when you tripped over that cat, you tripped over the cat. Details. Yord tossed him his coat. Stew's getting cold, St. Elias. Move your sanctified feet. Yord shouldered open the door to Cecchini, a pub Mrs. Pelly claimed was named after a Xerian sailor she'd loved decades ago. Poetic, eh? She'd wink, though the faded sign still misspelled it as Tazzini. The bell clanged, slicing the clotted air of pipe smoke and drunken stupor. A half-dozen dock workers hunched at the bar, their laughter as weighty as the crates they hauled. 2 stews and beers, Jord called to Mrs. Pelly, who stood behind the counter polishing glasses. Elias interjected, Just a bottle of water, please. Mineral, if there's any. Right, boys. 2 stews, a beer, and a mineral coming up. Sit yourselves down, Mrs. Pelly said as she vanished behind the kitchen door. They'd barely claimed their corner table, its wood scarred with patrons' initials, when Mrs. Pelly barged back in. She thumped down 2 bowls of greasy stew, a sloshing pint, and a glass of water. The stew's scent unfurled, roasted marrow steeped in bone broth, wood smoke-kissed thyme, and the earthy sweetness of carrots left to soften for hours. It clung to the air, thick as the crust of rye bread Mrs. Pelly tossed onto the table. Humble, yes, but steeped in the kind of stubborn nourishment that kept making Yord coming back. Eat, she grunted as she left. And eat they did, heartily, with gusto. And it didn't take long for their spoons to scrape the bowls clean. Too quickly, really. The hollow clink of iron on ceramic betraying a hunger neither brother knew to have. Cheers, said Yord, raising his glass and taking a hearty swig. Why'd you skip the beer? Elias swirled his glass, watching the whirlpool settle. Someone's got to remember the way home. Last time you drank, you mistook a lamppost for an alley. He paused, thumbing on table's edge. Besides, beer tastes better when it's not paid by debt. Jord had no retort. He let silence hang between them, thick, guilty, sharp as the paper note crumpled in his pocket. Guilty? Yes. The debt still gnawed at him. A yellowed scrap from Old Man Heron's Ledger of Promises, stamped with his own sloppy signature. He'd meant to repay it weeks ago, but like the rusted hinges on his bedroom door, squealing, ignored, he'd let it linger. Now, with compounding interest, it would fester. "I have joined the guards," said Jord, staring into his pint. Elias let the words hang, then froze. "You mad? After what they've done to Yis..." "It's better than any gig I've scrounged," Jord shot back, tone hollow, almost haunted. "And don't pretend you haven't seen the overdue bills pinned to our calendar. It's bleedin' red, Elias, and for how much I fancy the color, I fancy it not enough to admire it in such papers." Elias set his glass down with a clink sharp enough to almost cut the tavern's murmur. "You've got a mark on your record, Jord. The ride at the docks. They'll toss your application into the shredder first glance. Not if they're in badly need of hands." Jord leaned forward, voice low. "And it turns out they are. Get in front of some clerks, talk to them, and then you are in. Fastest job interview I ever had." "What?" Elias spat out the word. "So now you're their thug? A walking jackal? If it gets me, us, money, then yes, I will become anything required of me." Elias stared at him, then barked a bitter laugh. He leaned in, voice fraying. "They'll own you. You'll be running their debt collector's errands in..." "That shiny badge." Jord shrugged, but his jaw clenched. A tell Elias knew too well. For a long moment, neither brother spoke. The tavern's clamor swelled around them. Clinking glasses, slurred hymns, the thud of a drunk collapsing into his own plate. Finally, Elias dragged a hand down his face. "Fine, play their dog. But when they send you to kick in some poor man's door..." He jabbed a finger at Jord's chest. "Don't come whining to me about the fleas." Jord nodded, hollow. "Wouldn't dream of it." Elias stood, chair screeching like the hinges back home. "You're a fool." "Yeah," Jord said, but didn't look up. Elias hesitated at the door, hand braced against the frame, his expression fraying with unsaid words. The bell clattered in his wake. Jord stared at his own palm. He wondered if guilt had a compound rate too. When Jord stepped out of the pub, the sun still hung heavy, a bloated, unrelenting eye that oozed eternity. To Jord, the day felt already wasted, its hours dissolving like a tingle of smoke in the breeze. The conversation gnawed at him, yet he held no power to sway anything. His life was labor, then more labor, stolen naps between shifts, calluses made for measly coin that vanished like steam. My sole accomplishment? Jord looked down. Not yet growing a laborer's gut. Perseverance hadn't saved him. It had only carved him hollow. Why wait for tomorrow's morning? Get the shit done today, he thought, and then walked. The Citadel's halls echoed hollowly, the morning's clamor gone. Only the click-clack of Jord's boots on polished stone polluted the silence. No cues, no barked orders, just his boots and his own shadow stretching thin under boring lights. Building 3, he repeated, passing vaulted archways until he found the east wing. A dented door bore a plaque. Reception. Inside, a cramped closet more than a room. A woman behind a desk tapped at a terminal, her face lit blue by the screen. "Good day. How can I help you, sir?" Her voice carried the monotone hum of a dial tone. "Morning? Are you perchance Officer Laurie?" "That's my colleague." Her emerald eyes flicked to him, then back to the screen. "If you're here for him, you must be a new recruit. Name? Jord Whitaker." She arched a brow as she typed. Keys. Clacking. "Your induction's tomorrow. You're early." A smirk tugged at her lips. "Ah, one of those. One of... what?" "The eager ones." She mimed air quotes, chipped nails glinting. "Can't wait to toss yourself into the meat grinder. Think drowning in paperwork will smother your problems?" Jord held her gaze. "Just here for the money," she snorted. "Sure." She slid a form across the desk. "Sign here and here. Grinder choose quick, eager or not." He scrawled his name, ignoring the tremor in his hand. "Wait, shouldn't I get something?" His voice was flat, worn smooth as the countertop under his palms. "A manual? Uniforms? Last clerk wasn't much help. Do I get more than one? Spares? The clerk sighed, a hiss of steam escaping a kettle, and drummed the desk with her pen. Manuals are digital. Got a phone? Jord nodded. Get a technician to sync it with the city network. Otherwise, if not working, we'll issue you a brick. She lingered on the word. Uniforms. 2, to be precise. Issued post-orientation. Tomorrow. She slid a keycard across the counter. Smart cards. These. Synced to the network. Holds your basic details. Service record. Report to the big gray brick building on Molossi Lane. Can't miss it. 3rd floor for the newly minted. I'm told lifts jam halfway. Stairs will save you time. Jord pocketed the keycard. Anything else? She asked, already turning. Back to her screen. Should I report to this office for tomorrow's orientation, or just head straight to the guard quarters? The clerk, Halen M., according to her plaque, tapped a command into her terminal. I'll notify headquarters. Meanwhile, you can head to the guard quarters on Molossi Lane. Familiarize yourself with the layout, the lockers, the lot. She nodded toward the door. Might even meet a few kindred souls. Jord hesitated. Now? Unless you'd prefer to stare at me all afternoon? He cleared his throat, thumb brushing the edge of the smart card. Suppose gazing stars are not the worst way to kill time. The clerk's gaze lifted briefly, her sternness thawing. By a fraction. Save the charm for your new co-workers, Whitaker. They'll need the morale. She tapped her screen, voice quieter. Grinder, choose faster if you're distracted. Head to the quarters. Ask for Mara at the desk. She'll show you the ropes. A pause. And eat first. Canteen's grim, but the chicken stew's edible on Tuesdays. Jord raised a brow. Today's Sunday, through? Exactly. Her lips twitched, almost a smile, before she nodded to the door. Go on. I'll ping HQ you're en route. Good luck, she added with a softer and kinder tone than he'd expected. Jord lingered a beat, heart beating faster. But his mouth clammed, then he turned. The clerk's terminal resumed its clatter. As he stepped into the hallway, by the time Jord reached the gray brick bulk of Molossi Lane's guard quarters, a feeble rain had turned into a needling drizzle, dusk leaching the color from the streets. A man in sodden fatigue slouched under the archway connecting the compound with the outside, cigarette smoke curling upwards. He eyed Jord, snorted. Rookie's 3rd floor. Better use the stairs, unless you fancy getting stuck with yesterday's sandwich stink. Jord nodded, passing the open gate. You are the first you now? The man ground his cigarette underfoot, smirk etched with a cynicism older than his face. Mara's on desk duty. She'll love you, especially if you're here to lighten her filing. The stairwell swallowed him whole, reeking of damp concrete and the burnt tang of stale coffee. Above, voices spiraled down, a bark of laughter, the tinny blare of a radio static drowned songs of protest. Jord climbed and then climbed some more. Each step reverberated Helen's warning. Grinder, choose quick. By the time he reached the 3rd floor, sweat glued his collar to his neck. Another reception desk, the last, he prayed, loomed ahead, lit by the same sterile glare endemic to bureaucratic hellholes. A woman hunched over a terminal, her posture mirroring Helen's, though her plaque read Mara V name, she said, not glancing up. Jord Whitaker, Jord said. She squinted at her screen. Whitaker, early bird? A flicker of a smirk. Well, a late bird in this case. Regardless, sign here and here. Orientation's tomorrow, but you'll need the pre-screening waiver. She handed Jord a fountain pen. He scrawled his initials. How many more? Patience, recruit. Mara slid another form across the desk. Waiver first, then the liability disclosure, then the gods. More, she arched a brow. Institutions got rules, more for troublemakers. Another chuckle. She knew, had gossip already poisoned the well? The hum of the printer machine grated like a dull blade. Jord stared at the flickering light above her desk. Signing, then more signing. Why didn't the other clerks let me do all these forms there? Protocol. But what's the point? He leaned forward, pen held in his grip. Isn't this all just meaningless? Wasteful? Yes, and then yes. But this is the job, and we do not make the rules. Mara finished, finally looking up. Her eyes were gray, flat as the terminal screen. That's the job first lesson, Whitaker. Protocols must be followed. A fresh sheet spat from the printer. She snagged it midair. Now, non-disclosure agreement. Section 12.3. Unauthorized publications of critiques will void your pension and will dock your pay. George snatched the pen. Bullshit. Bullshit, Mara agreed mildly, has its own subsection. She leaned forward, gray eyes glinting, with the quiet weariness of someone who'd seen 100 recruits cycle through. Whitaker, let you in on an open secret. Rules only bite if someone's watching. Do as you're told, keep your head down, and no one will bat an eye at minor missteps. She tapped the form. But skip a step? A shrug. You will meet the system teeth. And trust me, it bites. Yord stared at the non-disclosure agreement, its dense paragraphs swimming. And the pension? What pension? Mara deadpanned. Sign. And he scrawled his name once again, ink smearing his palm. Yord flexed his hand, the ache in his knuckles a dull protest. Don't think I've ever signed this much in my entire life, Mara shrugged, stacking the forms. Job. Second lesson, Whitaker. You'll sign your name till it stops feeling like yours. Yord signed 5 more forms. Now what? He pushed the stack back, ink smudging his thumb. You lot said I can't do squat before orientation. Can't you expedite somewhat? Mara's smirk returned, sharper this time. Expedite. Cute. She filed the forms into a drawer labeled pending, low priority. Tell you what, head to the canteen. Kitchen staff's always shorthanded. Peel spuds, scrub pans. Unofficially, of course. Unofficially. Grinder's third lesson, Whitaker. She nodded to the flickering corridor light. No one cares what you do, as long as you don't step on the wrong toes. And if I refuse? Mara's gaze drifted to her drawer. Then you'll sit here, and I'll find more forms. Yord's phone buzzed, a shrill, outdated alarm he'd forgotten to remove. Problem? Yes, almost forgot. Need to synchronize this. He held up his phone. With the network, Yord said, and then put his phone onto the table. Synchronization with a personal device require a form, she said, sliding a triplicate form toward him. She nodded at the paperwork. Fill this. Section B needs your blood type and preferred font for alerts. Yord scribbled answers, half guessing. Why the font? Guard's IT manual. Aesthetic cohesion mitigates cognitive dissonance in high-stress scenarios. She quoted with her fingers. Or because the techs are pretentious twats. Her lips twitched. He shoved the form back. How long? Confirmation takes. She squinted at the submission code. Anywhere between 2 hours and never. Depends if Robert is sober. A notification pinged. Ah, lucky day. He will ping you a login by the hour. And if it doesn't work? Mara shrugged. Then you're a brick carrier. I think I will follow with your earlier suggestion. Yord clawed at his collar, the damp fabric suctioned to his skin. Where's the canteen? Second floor, then follow the smell of burnt gravy. He left, the thrum of printers fading behind him. Somewhere ahead, a man barked orders. A voice swore. Yord walked faster. Mara's advice rang true. The stench of burnt gravy seared Yord's nostrils long before the canteen's double doors lurched into view. 10 steps down a flickering corridor, and there it sprawled. A cavern of harsh fluorescence and stainless steel countertops, the air thick with stench of industrial detergent. A mountain of unpeeled potatoes teetered beside a sink. Behind it, a wiry man in a grease-streaked apron barked into a handheld radio. Said 6 crates, not bloody 7. He spotted George, scowled. You lost, mate? Mara sent me. Implied you're in dire need of hands. The man, Hesk according to his name tag, snorted. Short-handed. We're short on sanity. He lobbed a peeler at Yord. It clattered onto the counter. Knives are blunt, spuds are sprouting. Knock yourself out. Jord eyed the peeler, its blade nicked and dull. Pay? Hesk grinned, revealing a chipped incisor. Pays tomorrow. Today's volunteer. Rookie's law. Pre-contract labor accrues no fiscal obligation. Handy in it? He tossed a sprouting potato into a bucket. Gray's got a clause for everything. Labor, then more labor. Yord rolled his sleeves, his phone digging into his thigh as he leaned into the sink. Damned angels. Forgot to ask. For the handbook. Maybe Hesk will run me up. Have you read the manual? Yord asked, peeling with deliberate slowness. Read it? Hesk barked a laugh. Mate, I lived it. 20 years scrubbing pans teaches you the guard's 3 truths. He held up grease-blackened fingers. 1. Rules exist to hang. You, not them. 2. Volunteer means unpaid. 3. That brick they call a manual? He jerked his chin at Yord's phone. It's got one useful line, page 241. Oversights may be rectified retroactively. Means they'll dock your pay tomorrow for today's fuck-ups. Jord's peeler slipped, gouging the potato. So why bother? Because, Hesk lobbed another spud at him, this job's simple. Head down, do what you're told, and you'll, trust me, survive the grind. Plus, he paused, wiping grime off his apron, the uniform's good for one thing, catchin' eyes, some very appreciative eyes. A wink, sharp as a blade. If you're lucky, he added, almost an afterthought. The sink filled with murky water. Jord's phone buzzed. A notification from the city network, already syncing. Welcome to the Guard, it read. Thanks for diving into this story with me. Don't miss out on the next one. Hit that subscribe button, give this video a big thumbs up, and drop a comment below with your thoughts. I'd love to hear what you think.